Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome this evening to the launch of the latest in the series of archival Margs that deals with the readings on dance. I'm Naman Ahuja. I'm the general editor of Marg and professor of art history at JNU. And I'd like very much to be able to thank the IIC for collaborating with Marg on all of these events that we've been able to host together to bring to the audiences here in Delhi. Marg, as many of you know, was set up in 1946 by a group of intellectuals based in Mumbai, but including some scholars and practitioners of architecture from Sri Lanka, urban designers particularly, to be able to debate on what a post-colonial vision would be for the architecture and design of a new modern India. Not a definition of modernism that had ipso facto come with the baggage of colonialism, but one that was also valued, one that valued what an Indian modern would look like. What would an Indian modern look like if India had forged one without the atrocities rent upon it by colonialism? It was soon realized that a position on this could not be articulated without a knowledge of actually looking in the mirror afresh and seeing who we are civilizationally for ourselves rather than allow the colonial forces to hold a mirror up to India. It was necessary to look at, to document, and to tell the story of India from a South Asian perspective. Over the past 75 years, the disciplines that Marg built up have themselves grown and changed. As Mulk Raj Anand had himself predicted in 1955, you can read that quote there, as the discovery of India proceeds, as we make efforts to inherit our past culture, we begin to realize the gaps in our knowledge of the various historical periods are almost as vast as the centuries through which our ancient culture built up. He also made a rather prescient other quote. Ever since its inception, Marg has sought to make a new kind of critical approach towards Indian artworks. We do not think that we have succeeded in changing the trend of Indian art criticism amongst all our contributors, but we did put forward overtly and by implication certain hypotheses which are beginning to be shared among a number of students, especially the younger generation, so that there has been a clear shift in emphasis from the old criticism to what he called the new criticism. Setting up a lively forum like that was the mandate of the Modern Architectural Review Group. But very soon, the acronym was found to be too limiting. And MARG just became Marg, the path instead. And so it no longer stood for its acronym, which was rooted in architectural studies, but it instead became about civilizational and cultural studies. And new kinds of writers began to emerge and be showcased in the magazine. And gradually the magazine grew and turned into a series of books. And instead of turning out with 4 magazines a year, which was in the very early years produced bilingually in French and in English, because it was important to reach out to the colonized French world as much as it was to be able to reach out to the colonized English speakers. Marg began to produce 4 hardbound books every year as well. So that made it 8 publications. And then gradually we began to include more, and we went up to 12 publications in a year, which, for those of you who know Mumbai, will know that little office in the Army Navy building has actually churned out quite a lot of copy over these past now 77 years. But over the past 75 years, as I was saying, the very disciplines that Marg has contributed to building up have themselves grown and changed. Marg pioneered research and documentation of Indian traditions of architecture as well as craftsmanship. Be it woodwork, jewelry, textiles, metalwork, or stone carving, it pioneered studies on Indian iconography and the static body in sculpture, but also the living traditions of dance. It has looked at the changing impulse of defining the modern while still innovating within the grammar and vocabulary of Indian tradition of miniature and wall painting. And it has done this, as I said, over 75 years. And 75, we decided, was a good age to take stock of one's life and to be able to see what we have done and how worthy it has been and whether it's going to yield anything worthwhile. Have we been good at what we have done? And some amount of self-awareness is required in order to be able to see whether we are fit to carry on for another 5, 10, 15, who knows, maybe even another 25 years, and reach a grand 100 one day. So many people who are present here today and many other friends have come back to us and said that it was necessary to be able to do this criticism, do this self-critique. And so we embarked on, the first of the volumes that embarked on this was called Readings on the Temple. And that tried to put forward a series of ideas to see how Marg has helped define the discourse on the subject of Indian temples, and indeed, what were the things that Marg forgot to do, didn't do, which others did, and how that has changed the shape of the study. And therefore, signaling to us what we as editors who run Marg can do going forward, and what would be the ideas that we would like to develop. This was also coming out of a post-lockdown phase of introspection. I think all of us benefited from the great pause in our lives to be able to really take stock. Marg changed hands, and it was entrusted to a new editor, a new management team, and it was necessary to be able to take stock, also to be able to see, as I was saying, as to what Marg can do now, going forward. So the 5 readers we decided to come up with was temples, which looked at temples beyond just the Hindu temple, and begins with the rather provocative statement that temples were not just made only in India and only for Hindus. That's the first thing that we begin with as the opening sentence. And we look at the wide variety that exists. Our second reader in the series was studies on, or readings on textiles. We then came out with readings on modernism, and I'm delighted to be able to say Shukla Sawant, who edited that, is over here, and I want to thank her very much for having put together such an extraordinary volume. And she did it in record time too, I have to say, which is quite something to be able to pull off. We have another reader in the pipeline right now, which is on studies on Indian painting, which includes wall painting and miniature painting, pre-modern Indian painting traditions. So all the way from Ajanta to Kizil, through the pothis of the Jains and Buddhists, through the arts of the book, coming all the way to the colonial period. But what we are here to celebrate today is the volume that we are here to be able to see, which is Readings on Dance. This is a volume that I'm delighted to be able to welcome Urmimala Sarkar Munsi and Anita Elizabth Cherian, the 2 guest editors who are sitting here, who have put together this volume, which is an equally extraordinary volume. Now, each of these 5 volumes is designed to present the field of where we stand in the field from a contemporary lens. So for instance, we look at current practitioners. In the one on textiles, we begin with who are the master weavers that we know of. Each volume has sought to ask some very tough questions. And how do we really wish to inherit our past? I mean, inheritances come with responsibilities. And these responsibilities can be both burdensome, but they can also be enriching. And so it's up to us really to be able to decide what we want to do with the richness of our inheritances and how much we want to be burdened by them. And this has been a perpetual question for us for the past 75 years as an independent nation, because we are so civilizationally rich that one has to be able to think about what we're going to do with that as we embrace the modern. So whether it was the textiles volume, we had to ask who were the revivalists and what does revivalism mean? And the same thing has been done when it came to the dance volumes. I mean, the previous one was from the dance volume, and then there's one from the textiles volume. Who were the people who led the way in the field of Indian textiles? Well, similarly, when it comes to any of the volumes that we've done, Mohan Khokar's archive was absolutely germane, and Ashish very kindly gave us access to the photographs, which we could put in the opening part of the book, which actually dealt with who were the great pioneers in the revivalism and modernization of Indian dance. But all of this also comes with a deep understanding of the notion of history. How do we know what we do about our pasts? So each of the 5 volumes has actually posed certain questions. How did we reconstruct these histories, whether it was of dance, or textiles, or temples, or paintings? How do we know what we know? Where's the evidence for it? Where was it coming from? And so each of the 5 volumes asks, there's a certain parity in the organization of each of these 5 volumes. And so in the dance volume, for instance, our editors have opened with the question of heritage, heredity, and arts patronage. What are the debates around these matters? And this leads to an obvious question about the state support for dance in independent India. Just as we have to ask the question about what were the ethics and the guiding principles for the state support for modern art in India, or for temple architecture in India, for the construction and the perpetuation of the archaeological survey in India, for the building of, for the support for the Handloom and Handicrafts Commission to be able to carry on its work with Indian textiles in India. So these questions had to be asked of all the great discipline for all the arts in India. So there's a certain parity, as I was saying, to the organizing principles of all of the volumes. Then the question comes when you're defining South Asian culture, and you're defining particularly Indian culture, well, which regions are you going to leave out? I won't say which you're going to include, because the big question becomes, who are you going to exclude? And on what basis are you excluding certain narratives? And whose histories are you going to deny when you're talking about the national culture? And so in this particular volume, the chapter has been called Regional Performances and Living Traditions. But this is very much like what we did in the temples volume, where we looked at Baluchistan and Cambodia and Laos and Banaras, living traditions and historical traditions, and how they are being balanced out. We looked at the same questions in textiles as to what defines our identity, and which regions are we going to include, and how we are going to be able to include them. What's beginning to emerge is that these 5 readers together are making a kind of a pedagogical intervention in the curriculum. And I hope through a perusing of these 5 volumes, it's not just the general reader, but also teachers who teach undergraduate programs, particularly across India and in the rest of the world, on Indian art and culture, will find these readers taking an approach which is well illustrated and accessible in order to be able to see what are the new ways by which we can impart knowledge on Indian art and culture worldwide. What are the questions that need to be asked? How can we make it more inclusive? Every article that is featured in these volumes has a little URL at the bottom that is mentioned of each page. We couldn't always print every article in full, but we could at least condense it or excerpt it or give it to the readers as a photo essay so that then they can use the URL to be able to go online and buy that article for a modest amount of money or buy the entire volume for a mere 250 rupees and go through the entire volume if that's what they wanted. And so you have the online edition, which is a much more fulsome and wholesome treatment. And this acts like a kind of a directory for the teacher and the student to know where to go if you want to know more about that subject and what you can access online from the Marg website to be able to deepen your knowledge. So I hope that these 5 readers taken together will be able to expose the public to the kind of variety and ways of thinking about a particular subject. The biggest issue with dealing with the dance volume, of course, has been the enormous weight of tradition that comes with the question of dance. So the 3rd chapter, the secret red rahasya that lies at the heart of a Marg book, in this case, is this question of presenting and also representing the classical. And it's the big secret that we want to actually debate, because all too often the question of the classical holds so much public credibility because it is what rouses the public into knowing that this is our identity, not quite realizing how modern and how fabricated it might be, how orchestrated and controlled it might be, and which are the forces that control that identity, who manipulates it, and for what reasons, is something that needs to be prized open as a question. And that actually takes us to very significant questions, not just about the role of patronage, but also about the role of the audience, which I hope we will have some kind of a discussion on today. So in this, when I was saying that how is the notion of the classical even constructed? Well, leading writers over the years have contributed to Marg. Many important people. Kapila Vatsyayan, who used to be over here at the India International Center, was a trustee of Marg and earlier an editorial board member for many years, and deliberated a large number of the issues that we have put forward in this volume. And I'd like to remember her with great gratitude as I speak before you today. But so many others who have contributed to our understanding of the discipline have used Marg as a platform to be able to express their ideas, and I hope many of you will too. That's quite important, that it remains a lively platform going forward. Different scholars have brought different approaches to Marg. Padma Subramaniam, for instance, was interested in not just the documentation of the sculptures which she was looking at, but also then to be able to use photography, to be able to document these things, and to be able to actually work out a vocabulary for dance. And Marg was then the venue that was going to publish that vocabulary. The same thing happened with some of the studies on Kathak. Some of the things happened in the field of textiles in the same way, with leading practitioners telling us what our historical identity with the textiles was. I think these debates go forward and finally bring us with the practitioners into examining what is the role of the living practitioner. And how much are we allowing our living practitioners to be innovators and modern? Or are we always going to look upon our living practitioners as being arrested in like some rishi or some muni in some time past and not think of them as modern living artists? Is an Indian guru always supposed to be of a particular type, and are we always going to treat them as if they were arrested in the 12th and 13th centuries, or are we actually going to look upon them as modern practitioners? And I think this has been the burning question that has come up in each of the volumes, as to how do we look upon tradition from the contemporary lens? What do we do with indigo? What do we do with sacredness and the contemporary construction of temples, with the modern revivalism of Vastu in interior design? How do we deal with these issues today when we're thinking about defining a modern contemporary? So I think, without further ado, I should welcome up onto stage our speakers for today, who I want to thank very much as I come to this important question of dance in contemporary times. Three people who have, I think, served this question all through their careers very illustriously. Our guest editors, the first of whom I'd like to welcome is Anita Cherian. Anita is Dean and Associate Professor at the School of Culture and Creative Expressions at Ambedkar University. And she's published widely in the fields of post-colonial literature and theory, performance study, cultural policy studies, and dance. May I also please welcome Urmimala Sarkar Munsi, who has stepped in and very kindly taken on the honor and responsibility of Dean and Professor at the School of Arts and Aesthetics at JNU. Urmi is widely published in the field of gender and dance, the embodied experience and corporeality, performance documentation, and the politics of identity and regional performance. And finally, may I please welcome Navtej Johar. Navtej, as many of you know, is a Bharatanatyam dancer, a choreographer, a yoga practitioner, a scholar, and a social activist. He's formally trained in Bharatanatyam at Rukmini Devi's Kalakshetra, along with Leela Sampson at the Sri Ram Bharatiya Kala Kendra in Delhi, and also studied performance studies at NYU. Urmimala, may I please request you to be the master of ceremonies and take this conversation forward, and may I thank you very much for having put this volume together. No, wherever you're comfortable. Sure, as you like.
Do you want us to move to the center now?
Naman, can we move to the center?
Yeah, you can. Are those animations on?
No,
it's like that?
there are
then don't.
behind.
Then don't you? Then don't. I thought it was just going to be a simple
No, it's
transition
okay.
from slide. Those. Yeah. Yeah. Then
You
don't.
want to move
just?
there?
Do you want to just
It's
come
okay.
here?
No, it's okay.
It's fine?
We'll go there and speak if we want.
All right.
We'll see. Thank you, Naman. Thank you, IIC. Thank you, all of you who have made time to come and share this evening with us. It's pure joy to be here, and really almost unbelievable that this volume is now there for us to touch, read, and experience. It happened suddenly, like many of Naman's suggestions and projects, and then it actually came true with all kinds of nudging from him, from the Marg team. So I want to thank the Marg editors, editorial team, the Marg office, the technical team. This was a fabulous experience working with them. And I'm sure Anita is going to, also agree. And I'm thanking Navtej for making time, coming all the way from Punjab and being with us. So this is also a very special occasion. So I wanted to try and start with a small story of this first day that we were handed over 312 exactly articles of all sizes, which were some of, I think, 25 pages, some commentaries of 2 pages, and huge amount of photographs. These were of 75 years, first volume being 1946, where there was one mention of this, this article on Kalpana, the film by Uday Shankar. So Marg first volume, though it was basically claiming to be art and architecture, etc., it carried a dance essay. That kind of made me feel, okay, we can, dare to open this whole folder which had 312 such kinds of essays. One whole night, I sat through all these articles, read. In the morning, at 12 o'clock next day, I finished. I wrote to her. She said, "You are a virus." How on earth? Why are you doing this? I can't do this in your speed. So this was our first dealing with Marg writings, and it was a beautiful experience. I would not exchange it with anything in my life, I can tell you. Because for the first time, I was also getting educated about this whole thing of, this is not about just antiquity. This was not just about history. It was a kind of a insight into an archival world, also a documentation of things that we know once existed, does not get danced anymore. Dance styles which have changed their names, dance styles which have changed their spaces of belonging. They have come to Delhi from small localities and now belong to the national spectrum rather than the regional spectrum. So histories have changed, people have changed, photographs have changed, dresses have changed, ornaments have changed, adavus have changed, many things have changed. And from the first volume, sketches of the basic movements can actually give a big competition to Laban notation, which we talk about in the dance world with quite a lot of pride, about being the only authentic way of notating dance. Marg has all that. And on the other hand, Marg has region, a representation of ground zero, which we did not ever realize like this. There are people, practitioners from the group, from the spaces. When you read those articles, you will get a lot of them in this selection, because she and I were mesmerized by some of the writings of the practitioners from the ground. Those practitioners who were till then not being called gurus. They were master teachers, surely, but they were not named by the nation as gurus. They were not being given they were not receiving any special remuneration. They were just people who were passionate about their art. So this kind of glimpse into this dance world was really humbling, and also made us realize that all that is dance is not reflected in our evolving history telling of dance. Whereas Marg intentionally or unintentionally, in their dance related articles or region related articles, have actually done this documentation of forms which were part of certain kinds of community practices, ritual spaces, or even social rites of passage, marriage, death, birth ceremonies. So it actually is quite an anthropological experience on one hand to see Marg writings. And I think, Anita, why don't you share some of your thoughts, and then we will come in as a discussion.
Okay, thank you so much, Urmi. I just want to kind of reiterate Urmi's comment about gratitude to Marg, to the Marg editorial team, and then to Manasi and others who have helped us in an extraordinary way. And I also want to thank Urmi, who has been an extraordinary, I don't know if I ever called her a virus, but she certainly is terrifying. And my thanks to Navtej also for being here, for actually going through the volume and wanting to engage us. My kind of relationship with so there was this archive, and I am a champion procrastinator. So I approached things very slowly. The moment I realized it was so enormous, I was terrified, ducked, and then started, because we had a meeting the very next day. So Urmi had emailed me saying, I don't have the time, I'm not going to do it. The next morning she arrived having gone through the entire archive. I went through a small part, and it took me a long while to actually get through a lot of the material. And it was an incredibly steep learning curve for somebody like me, but extraordinary. My primary concern has been with institutions and with archives. And lo and behold, I came across one of the most extraordinary archives. And quite, it was, my gratitude to Naman is immense, because he brought me in touch with something that I did not really expect. Extraordinary archive which enthralled me. It also angered me. It also energized me. And it made me realize how kind of extraordinary the project of putting together this thing, this idea of India from 1946 on, multidisciplinary idea of India from 1936 on. And part of that multidisciplinary idea of India that was being put together was the world of dance. And the other thing, like Urmi just mentioned, the kind of the artwork, the sketches, the photography. Again, this was something that it took me a while to work with, because, okay, so I come from performance studies, and I've always kind of, the live performance is something that you watch with a great deal of intensity. And then you look at the archive. In the Marg collections, what I was encountering was photography and sketching of a kind of extraordinary order, and where each volume was equally divided, or maybe not so equally divided, between the visual and the textual. So for me, part of the learning curve was to kind of not just obsess over the textual, but also pay attention to the visual. And that became a kind of part of the work that I needed to process in the putting together of the volume, where what needed to go into the volume? Is it the visual material? Or what should take what should be the most significant? Is it the visual material? Is it the textual material? So this was something that I was kind of concerned about. But, and so there were these essays, I think Naman spoke about it, where we've just used images from certain essays and removed the text. And that has in some ways been kind of contextualized in the introductory sections. So what we have done in a way is to kind of break the material up, or the archive up, into 5 sections. And I'll just very quickly kind of give you the names, and then we'll kind of go back and forth to talk about. So the first is the section on heredity, heritage, and patronage. The second was that of regional performances and living traditions. The third is the section on presenting and representing the classical. The fourth was the Guru Shishya Parampara, and the fifth was dancing in contemporary times. And here again, because the archive was so immense, and the thing about an archive such as this is Marg was publishing all kinds of materials without any kind of, they were publishing what they thought was important at any given point of time. So for us, we had to find ways of organizing the material, because there was no structure that was there in the material itself. So so in a certain sense, these 5 templates became places where we were putting in material. We had many chapters under each section. And then, given constraints of space, relevance, we had to edit furiously. So each section has about 5 or 6 articles. They're of different lengths. They have different kinds of focuses. Foci, I hate that word. But so, I'll hand the mic back to Urmi, and we can carry on. Yeah.
So I just want to do the next round, and then we want to bring you in for something. so that you're ready. You're ready. So the thing is that the next thing that I wanted to say is that the question that we both were asking each other was that why would this book be why would it be collated the way it would be? Because if we do not know why this should be read, why these articles should be read and reread, then we don't know where we are going to go. So the questions emerged of these, which finally gave us our direction to these 5 sections. The questions that emerged was that what would be a course in dance. Because Marg volume, we might remember, is extraordinarily cheap and affordable. It is only rupees 350 rupees. At this time, 3,500 would not seem abnormal to say. But the thing is that this is an affordable thing. This is something that can be kept in a library. This can actually, in our mind, in our imagination, be a dance history read, a possible dance history reader. And that is an idea that Naman suggested that we keep in our mind from the very beginning. And it made sense. Because we really do not have a reader which will give us a kind of a overall, overarching kind of a read into dance history, giving us different directions. Though, of course, there is not enough space to make connection of a continuous or a complete history, and we are not saying that we have done this, but we have taken interesting highlights from dance history, historical highlights, and we have tried to build a narrative of assimilation, of change, of exciting new points, of innovations, and of experimentations, but at the same time, moments of consolidation in terms of historical events through the dancing bodies. So we have actually got this first part where we talk a lot about the Buddhist caves. We talk about movements that seem like dance, but we don't know whether they were dancing. There are a lot of arguments nowadays about naming bodies as dancing bodies. But there are certain moments where we have debated about which static representation actually refers to a dancing moment before and after. So it has arrived through a certain kind of a moving which is not an everyday moving. That was our concern in some ways. Similarly, we were also looking at bodies which are dancing but which seem like or which have been said to be not as skilled. So what does skill mean? For whom is skill? Is skill standardized? That was another question about reading, about skills. Then another question, leading question, was that is the guru to be frozen in this act of being, only the giver? Why is the guru not also acknowledged as a person who needs to be nurtured by the society? So the person who is a master teacher, who is spending time, he or she needs a certain kind of assurance from the social setting, because the social setting of community has been taken away from dancers. So in this new community space, the dancer teacher is also economically having to survive in a system which, of course, puts that person in a pedestal, but then he or she has to fend for himself or herself. So these were questions we were asking, and how we actually also kind of, I think Anita could take up that, certain other questions which came in with our classical section, with our section on heredity, and I suggest that.
Yeah, okay, so what I'm just going to do is, I'm going to just kind of read sections from the text itself, just to give you a sense of how we were processing material. And I'm going to, so for me, a big question that came up when I encountered this archive was, one, the kind of concept of the archive, the conceptual work of archiving, and Marg itself as a task of archiving, and the relationship of this archive to a kind of cultural politics of the nation. So I'm just going to read little sections from the text just to give you a sense of a feel. Okay, so this is from the introduction, and we begin by saying the project of post-colonial nation building is an archival enterprise. This is true across disciplines. Marg, which predates the institution of the national academies, anticipates perhaps their most significant goals, namely the acts of discovery, uncovering, invention, documentation, stock-taking, and consolidation. The difference, however, is visible in the materiality of the magazine and its exceptional visual and editorial aspects. Devised and produced from Bombay, led by the writer and aesthete Mulkraj Anand and a group of 14 architects, artists, and public intellectuals, the magazine was a multidisciplinary multidisciplinary from its very inception. So, I just want to kind of talk about interdisciplinarity. So the interdisciplinarity that we are concerned with references the many exhibitionary, documentary, and explanatory modes that exist cheek by jowl in the magazine. The essays on the grammars of dance are opportunities to develop visual languages, be it drawing or photography. The reports on performance forms from distant corners of the subcontinent have the quality of ethnographic reportage, and the classification of dance today is enabled through a form of reverse engineering via the detailed examination of archaeological sites. Here, the documentation of tangible heritage made possible through photographic technologies serves as both a reminder of historical imprints on present dance practice and as a readily available resource for the development of new movement and gestural vocabularies. I'll just also kind of, read a little from the introduction to the heritage thing. Here again, what I want you, very clearly, Urmi and I come from very different perspectives in a sense, methodological spaces, and it is reflected in how we approach the editorial task, at least in terms of creating the editorial narratives. And so I just want to kind of flag that. So in reference to heritage, heredity, and arts patronage, so the context of decolonization in the subcontinent shaped a rhetoric of recuperation that applied across cultural and social history. We might ask, how does a nation emerging into a modern sovereign existence recapitulate its past in order to reimagine its present? This section is concerned with the ways in which questions of lineage, heritage, and patronage shape movement practices. In this regard, we ask, does the ephemerality of performance affect the forms of engagement with history? And in addition, how do the Marg archives contribute with their reflections on and participation in this exercise? The scholarship on dance in India suggests that it is a product of discourse and is itself discursive. We see assertions of national and cultural sovereignty being made with confidence from within the spaces of dance. Our concern is with formal practices and with the discursive narration of their histories of institutionalization. Marg is an important space from which we see the emergent Indian nation contending with its diversity and attempting to conceptualize it. Similarly, I just want to quickly kind of go to the red pages presenting and representing the classical. Marg's extraordinarily rich and varied assemblage of articles on India's classical forms offers perspectives which extend from 1946 to the present. The magazine's archive houses not only visual documentary materials that seek to transpose the energies of embodied movement onto ink and paper, it is also an invaluable resource through which critical attitudes and perspectives to the classical in the intervening decades might be traced. Our selection of essays and photographic materials represent, in some measure, the 8 designated forms of the classical: Bharatanatyam, Kathak, Manipuri, Kathakali, Kuchipudi, Odissi, Satriya, and Mohiniyattam. The depth of the archive has made the task of selection difficult, yet the effort has been to choose pieces which show an engagement with formal aspects, reveal conditions of emergence into visibility, unpack the politics of the classical, direct attention to the complex relationships that exist between writers, researchers, practitioners, and practices, and finally foreground the intimacies of engagement between performance forms and textualities. The production of the classical is a discursive initiative. It possesses a vocabulary simultaneously descriptive and categorizing. Marg's contribution to this project is significant. The definitions and elaborations of classical dance forms undertaken at Marg were carried forward by the Sangeet Natak Academy after its establishment in 1953. In 1954, the SNA began to designate and delineate classical forms by instituting the Sangeet Natak Awards. A remarkable unanimity of opinion is evident in the work published in Marg and in those articulated in the SNA's journals and conferences. Not only do the Marg articles elaborate on those policies, the magazine is also a significant forum, particularly in the early decades after independence, where debates regarding claims to classical status of one form or the other were amplified. So I just want to kind of go back to something that Urmi said, this question of how do we represent this material. 75 years and 75 years of, in many senses, in retrospect, a very difficult history. And we see that difficult history written onto cultural forms. How do we represent it? How do we recontextualize it? How do we actually show cultural practice not as something discrete, but as something that is completely embedded in the fabric of everyday life and in the politics of everyday life. So in a certain sense, to look at the debates on dance today is also, in a way, to reflect on the cultural debates that we are enmeshed in today. Yeah, thanks.
So we would like to give Navtej a chance as a person who has been receiving Marg editions from the past, has been associated with writing in many of the articles, many of the special editions of Marg. Navtej's interviews, Navtej's articles that mention Navtej's work are there. And I would like Navtej to just reflect on Marg and dance and 75 years of reading today.
Thank you. Thank you, Urmi. Thank you, Anita. Thank you, Naman. Thank you, Marg, for inviting me. This is kind of interesting because while I've been sitting, hearing both of you and seeing the images, I'm getting emotional. And I am a person who has gone very cold on dance. I've gone very, very cold on dance. And it's like meeting a very estranged, very dear friend or a relative, knowing that I know I deeply love dance. I'm deeply committed to dance. I deeply love dance. But then as I also keep saying that I can't stand dance anymore either. So it's that kind of a thing. But then, so that's one thing, that it's kind of really, done something to me. And also, yeah, I'll just share a couple of points. So first of all, my introduction to Marg. I joined Kalakshetra in 1980, and you can imagine what that would have taken. And I think in 1978, my friend, many of you would know, Ira Pandey, who was my neighbor in Chandigarh, she gave me a copy of Marg, the Bharatanatyam edition. And I think I must have pored over every single page, every night. And also at that point, because I was just kind of trying to break the news to my family that I wanted to be a dancer, I must have also kept it very, very, like I must have hidden it. And it's not a very easy book to hide. It was a big, glossy book with these, you know, I mean, you know what I mean, with these women painted with such large, whatever. So you know what I'm talking about. So it wasn't easy to hide. But the thing is that it was my introduction to dance, and I must have tried out every shape, every mudra, read everything, and began to also kind of fantasize about Kalakshetra, because the last few pages, as you know, are about Kalakshetra dance dramas. And when I did see the dance dramas for the first time, I'm getting goosebumps as I'm saying this, it was like, you know, a revisitation of something that I already knew. So it was a very, I mean, it was a game changer for me. At that point, in 1978, 79, Marg made such an impact on me. The other thing that kind of, I find kind of curious, is that in 1946, Marg is launched, which means a new voice, a new voice of India, a new discovery of culture, a new redefinition of culture, which to my mind is shy of grandiose, at least from a dancer's perspective. I'm not talking of any other perspective, but from a dancer's perspective. Very grandiose. I mean, I remember thinking that, you know, at that point, it was like all the greats in every field. I think I imagine them standing at the edge of a precipice, an abyss, and, you know, evoking a cultural past. And from where they could only make, you know, large imaginings and also clarion calls. I mean, to me, clarion calling is a huge thing about what was happening. I mean, nothing short of friends, Romans, countrymen, like literally that. So a new narrative is being very glamorously produced, imagined. So this is 1946. And at the same time, in 1947, as soon as India becomes independence, the anti-Notch bill is passed. And my affinity with the Devadasi is very strong for various reasons. And I can imagine, like, I've also been through court cases, and I know preceding a court case, preceding a hearing, the ferment and the fervor that goes on. So I see these two narratives kind of crisscrossing each other. And I can't help feel very sad. And very violated, actually, at some point. And I think this has been this has been our grouse against the imagining of dance. So two things. The third thing is a kind of funny thing. I mean, I also see how in 1978, Marg was a game changer, and then slowly Marg started becoming like a glossy coffee table book for me. And I started to take it with a pinch of salt. And then many, like I think, I don't know when Sunil Bhai produced the second edition, I think in the 90s or something. And I was asked to review it, and I, like a fool, like a practicing dancer, I accepted to review it, and I gave it a very negative review. So of course that, you know, that got me into a lot of trouble. But I also gave it a very negative review because it wasn't addressing the questions of the time at all. So anyways, So I guess there was one more point I had to make, and I'm forgetting that. But I guess that will come. I mean, I hope we'll have a conversation and things will come up. Yeah, I mean, it's also one of the things that really kind of that inspired and kind of evoked me was the fact that there is actually an archive. And an archive of imaginings, an archive of opinions, an archive of narratives. And that's what the dance archive is, because factually, and these are the facts of dance, not when somebody was born and when, but how and when it has been reimagined over and over again. So it's very encouraging in a way, as somebody who's also very committed to dance and writes about it, that there is something available. I would not have actually seen Marg as an archive earlier. And today I'm seeing it like suddenly it's like emerged as a solid archive. So thank you. I mean, yeah. Because of my perspective, because of my imagining it to have become a glossy. So thank you for putting this together, and thank you for inviting me. Yeah. And
So I think we'll soon have to come to an end, but I just wanted to open up this forum for people to ask questions if somebody has a question, or somebody has already read it and has some comments about what they like, don't like, or maybe would have liked to have seen as included in this. Anything that you would like to ask and talk about. We can pass the mic around if required.
Well, I'll take the privilege of starting off a conversation with you. I just found in this notebook my notes from our first meeting. And what were the kind of issues? And as Navtej very kindly and correctly pointed out, I think what he has said really speaks to what each of us have been trying to debate. Producing a large format book of photographs that allows the photographs to give their story and speak to us, allow the visual to be able to speak, it will never replace the performance. It will never actually take you to sitting with the dancer, but it can bring you as close as you can to be able to have the time to ponder the still. And publishing visual culture as a result is a challenge these days, because there has been this entire thing that, it's just a coffee table glossy. And how does that coffee table glossy, how do you give the photograph its space without giving it its format? And that's quite a major challenge for us as publishers. The other thing that I wanted to raise was that the first meeting we had was that we talked about what are the things that are important today in the photographs themselves, and in our selection of articles. Is it an uncritical and unbiased selection, or was there a subtext? Was there a reason why we selected these articles out of the 320? Because there were so many others that we could have chosen. But what was it in the photographs of these ones, or in the narrative of these ones, that allowed these to make the cut? And I thought a few points from that first meeting might help the audience and the readers know a little bit more. So for instance, costuming. And what's the history and the shift in costuming Indian dance? What were the nationalist narratives that went into the costuming of Indian dance? We don't have a chapter on this, but somebody who goes through the pictures carefully, they'll see the narrative of what goes on in the history of costuming. On shaping the body, the physicality of the body in Indian dance, and how that has changed, and where that has changed. Gender stereotyping, and how that has shifted, what forces acted upon the body and gender stereotypes 60 years ago, and how does it shifted, and what are the voices being put on it now? And again, the photographic archive allows you to look through that. Again, it's a subtext. The chapters are not there directly addressing it. The issues of caste, which is a very important issue for all of us. And this has been addressed, I think, in a masterly way by the editors of this volume. And I want to congratulate you for having done it the way that you have. Without actually talking about it, you have put it out there through example, through the inclusivity that the volume itself shows in terms of the types of dance and the debates around it that you have put out there in this volume. And I think that's why also looking through these visuals allowed us to be able to look at those questions about national and regional, marginalized and central, peripheral, all of these questions which matter. The fact that dance lives through the lens is something what started as the photographic lens and then became the TV studio and then dance and film is something which is a reality. And the shift in the audience for dance is something which we are now very seriously contending with. So one of the opening photo spreads asks a question as to what is the space for Indian dance? What is the valid space in which one dances? For whom? For whom does one dance? And on what occasion does one dance? So why should we be dancing? And if we should be looking at this question on who we are dancing for and why we are dancing, and then we end with the thing, well, where is the reality of our new audience, and who are we dancing for, and where are we dancing now? And I think these were some of the questions that went into the background of the selection and in the selection of the photographs as well. And I think they have a parallel narrative to tell.
I've been associated with photographing dance for over 60 years now, including that photograph up there. So I miss my friend, Dr. Sunil Kutar, who introduced me to Marg. So several of my pictures have been used in books on IIC, on Kshatriya, on... Every day I enjoy coming here or wherever else and capturing dance through my camera. I don't understand most of it, but the involvement of the dancer is what worth capturing. There's a certain association there. The dancer's involved, and that's the moment to capture if you can. And you miss it most of the time, but you keep trying. A lot of them, of course, nowadays with cell phones, shoot videos, whatever, but I've never shot video. It's still photographs, and I enjoy doing it, and I will continue doing it till I'm alive.
Thank you. Your photographs have been really, really wonderful, and they have been an extraordinary part of our archive. So it was a great privilege to be able to use them.
When one thinks of an archive, one thinks of facts and reality, truth, things you dig up. But when Navtej just said that it's an archive of imaginings, those imaginings being real to people's lives and how they live their lives, of those understandings, I think the juxtaposition of what you said and a typical understanding of an archive, and that understanding of dance as in it's real, but it's real to people and people's lives, but it's also at another level imagined, and those imaginings and the reality work together, and that complexity, I think has changed for me, in this conversation has changed for me what the archive could actually mean. It's not about truth, it's about perhaps belief. I don't know. So I guess that When you say that this can be used as a teaching tool, I'm wondering if it also needs a little, direct, like you read it like this, so how, read it as a way of not necessarily saying, understanding history as this happened on this date and then this happened and this happened in terms of chronology, but also in terms of how belief, imaginings, understandings also traverse a very, sometimes a parallel or sometimes a contrary thing. So I think for me, what shifted, this conversation shifted, was this understanding of archive as, and this notion of reality. But I'm, as someone who teaches on dance, I think it would be very useful to perhaps also put together this conversation online in some way, where I can take from that and hold a thread from there and go into the book. So yeah, it was not a question really, it was a comment.
But I take it as a question, and I'm trying to answer if I may. So I just wanted to say that, the questions that, or the pointers that we would like to give in each of the chapters, we very carefully selected and kind of dealt with in layers of writing of the introduction. It was a small writing, but we actually layered it time and again, because we wanted to see what are these questions that can actually make sense of the articles. And it kept changing over the time. The folio, we were calling it very technically the folios. So the folios would emerge in its shape and size. And I'll just read 3-4 lines to tell you how this making sense, or this direction that you are talking about, is actually embedded within the introduction. So in the regional performances and living traditions, we actually write the introduction, and in one place we say, the invisibilization of folk and tribal dancers in the cultural politics of independent India becomes clear in the differential attention given to regional dance forms in comparison to the large collection of essays on classical dances. It is also a kind of a reading of the Marg archive in general, but also our process of trying to kind of go into the ground zero of community practices. Like you were saying, that part of the practices which got eroded easily were the unwritten, unskilled, embodied ones, which were easily eroded and which were given the spaces in the margins. And then that we actually elaborate in this particular thing, but we also attend to each of the essays and how to read them. So each of the essays you will find has a small, very short introduction of how to read it within the history that we are talking about. So I think, I understand what you are saying, but I think part of it will be answered here.
Can I just add to that? I want to kind of go back to Navtej's kind of extraordinary image of 1978 and consuming the magazine when it comes. In a certain sense, giving you a sense of like what that visual project was, to actually construct a visual grammar and documentation of a practice when that practice is distant from you. So, and that kind of Navtej's kind of engagement is extraordinary to me, that you're looking at something that you desire so intensely, and it is here. And you are constructing your vocabulary from this. So that intimacy of the archive is extraordinary, the place of imagining, the place of feeling, the place of desire.
It's amazing, right? You don't associate desire with archive, typically. It's amazing how
but then that is precisely, I think that was something, also because most of us who kind of work on dance and cultural practice know the kind of debates that have been very, very, how do I put it, very heated over the last year. So when Naman spoke about caste, that was something that was very present in each of our discussions. And so when we looked at this archive, the presence of caste was so overwhelming. Caste and a certain idea of beauty, of aesthetics was there, and it was so overwhelming. So for me, for instance, the archive functioned both ways, both as a place of intense kind of cathectic attachment, and also a place where suddenly all kinds of arguments were becoming clear to me. This archive was actually showing so much, so many processes. And I think that's exactly what Urmi was also talking about. Suddenly these processes that we have heard about in anthropology, or we've heard about in relation to caste, in relation to reform, in relation to abolition, in relation to the question of equality, in relation to the question of like majoritarianism, all of that somehow is then suddenly pops out of the page and begins to slap us. And it was extraordinary that, and for me, it just felt like, my goodness, for 75 years, there is this material, 75 years of material. And if we were to read it systematically and in detail, what would, we did this, and each section is flagged, is contextualized, each essay is contextualized. We are giving a kind of direction, a direction which is clearly a direction from the present about how do we read this. But then I want to tell people out there that there is so much of material there that one could actually make 10 readers out of it.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks.
So I think is there a question there?
I think Navtej wants to say something.
Okay.
I want to say, okay, time ho gaya kya? Okay, I just want to say, I'll try to be, two things. A, I want to go back to the archive of imaginings, because we're talking of dance, and dance includes the audience. Dance is not only about the dance. Dance is about the viewer as well. Not about the viewer as well, about the viewer. And a thing like Marg prepares viewers. It prepares perspective. It gives us it constructs a vantage point. Actually, it creates a lens. And so when I fell in love with dance through the images of Marg, it was, first of all, I was not a dancer then, so it was talking to the novice in me, and of course the desire. But what I also want to address very briefly, if I can, the question that Naman raised about viewership, as to who is dance for, and I think the dance is in crisis right now, like deep crisis, like everything else in the world. Like everything else, dance is in deep crisis. And of course, dancers are always lamenting कि audience नहीं है, audience नहीं है. And कभी-कभी मुझे लगता है कि शुक्र है audience नहीं है, you know. Okay, but what I want to say is that very quickly, that when I spoke about the Devadasi and the grand imaginings, because I'm sitting here as a dancer, I think I need to say this. That one of the things that dance has become unwatchable for me, and for many of us, I think, hopefully, is that dance has become very self-conscious. You know, there's an eagerness to perform, there's an eagerness to show. Dance has become show and tell. Dance is like that eagerness. And the very self-consciousness that we are ambassadors of culture, and there's a certain stance that comes into the body immediately. And to me, dance has emerged over the years as I have been able to critique it And as I have been able to, as that glamour has, the mystique of dance is born off, the dance is actually about immersion, and immersion cannot happen till one is unself-conscious. So we are looking, we come to dance to be immersed, and we leave with like a flat projection, a flat and an over-enthusiastic projection, which is yeah. I mean, it's a no-starter there. So I think if dance is losing audience, it is because, I've said this for a long time, the dancers are climbing up the wrong tree. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Well, that's a debate, I think, which can go to craft.
As I said, everything is in crisis. The self-consciousness, that we are the custodians, we are the saviors,
Exactly.
we are the ambassadors. I mean, and this has been. I mean, the thing is that this is received kind of conditioning. Like I remember when I walked out of Kalakshetra, somebody patted me and said, "Now you are the ambassador of Indian culture." And for a second, I was like, "Wow!" And then when I realized what it really implied or what it means, it's if I'm bearing a cross, if I'm dancing here bearing a cross of Indian culture, I am not. I can just kind of put a placard saying "Mera Bharat Mahan" and just exit. I don't need to dance.
Resonate because I think we come from the same generation, and having practiced textiles or craft or product design in an India that was emerging and coming from an aesthetic which made you part so-called artist, so-called craftsman, so-called dancer, because you came from a background of parents that believed in that was just aesthetic, and a certain education and a patriotism and a nationalism which is quite different from what we take it today, right? And so we evolved by, I understand what you're saying about Marg, because it was literally from the 70s that one started subscribing to Marg. And when Naman became the editor, I think all he inherited from me was a bag full, that big, which I had in my place on the shelf. But it was the archival renderings of whether it was architecture, whether it was textile, whether it was dance or music, that as a creator of anything artistic, one was using that entire input to create yet another thing. What you are now discussing as a study of an anthropological study of an object which is so-called Indian. But we are all coming from working at the ground level, going through our journeys and creating something that is Indian to a point when today it has become the cell phone or Amazon on a set of designers, so-called designers, which are
Yes, the question of the modern. Where does the question of the modern lie in all of this? Where is the question of the modern?
Right.
Through this entire archive. I think that's
is my point.
is your point.
I don't
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
the words.
Wait
to-
for the one. You've got to pick up the volume on modernism.
I go through too much of it.
Yeah.
Exactly this. Marg was a kind of dictionary for us to open our minds further to our imaginations and create something for ourselves. You were not born to dance. I was not born to textiles or to craft, right? But we created something that was our own, taking the entire input, and for that we have to be grateful to Marg.
Yeah.
Thank you. Right.
Yeah, yeah. But I'm also critiquing all of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, all of it. I'm taking everything with a pinch of salt. Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
that we are critiquing today, of which we have become the so-called anti.
Any other questions and comments? Yes.
There was something.
Yes.
Last. It's 350.
Four times, but still some of them.
It costs us
That's true.
3,000 to produce each copy.
I understand that.
No, I'm just saying
Yeah.
that it costs about 3,000 to produce a copy. And we have to find a subsidy to be able to bring it down to 350. And that is a challenge.
Yeah.
The online edition is for 250,
Mm-hmm.
but and we can't make it cheaper than that. I think it's not possible.
We will have to hunt for
Yeah.
more subsidies from
No,
somewhere.
I'll tell you the danger
Yeah.
with that.
Yeah. Thank you.
It's not a simple argument.
Yeah,
You'd be doing an injustice. We don't want greater subsidy. There are book dealers in India who buy up our stock the minute it's published, and they hoard it. And they release it at 10,000 rupees a copy. And people buy it at that price, including leading libraries in India and the world, buy it for 10 to 13 to 15 to 25,000 rupees a copy for volumes of Marg, because they don't get access to becoming subscribers and buying it at 350 when it's first printed. So there are enough book distributors in India who will buy up all the copy and hoard it and then release it privately through shops and online a year or 5 years later. So we can't afford to subsidize it any further. It's about just getting it out there. I think that's the key to that. Anyway, any other questions?
There was one more.
Thank you so much. It's been a bit emotional for me as well to listen to this as a young performing artist. I can't claim any academic, I've not read a lot of the magazine. I've been more involved in the practice of it, but I have begun to read now about the politics of dance as I engage in the politics of the practice of dance. My question, so particularly to you, is because there are very few places where I think this conversation can be had. How do we stop perpetuating the crisis that plagues us in a very practical way, not in a academic way? Because many times you feel sort of like there's this window open behind you and you can just jump out of it and leave this because one has the choice to leave it as well. But something makes you continue in that process, at least for me at the moment. There's something, sort of, which works as a driving force and keeps me in it. So how do we how do we stop perpetuating the crisis that seems to have started in the past? And I feel it still plagues us, as you very rightly said, if one doesn't want to leave the entire genre.
Any other comments and questions? Let me.
Is this question addressed to anyone particular?
Well, to Mr. Johar, yes, but even you, ma'am, you've been seeing the way things have been going,
Take
so.
the next question and then.
Yeah.
It's again thinking aloud, not a particular question. But how do you see, whenever we access archives, whenever there is a material of going back into the past and bringing anything to present, and see it with the lens of technological development that is going along with it? So for example, dance and music have, the notion of archive in dance and music have been highly connected to the progression of technology as well. So in this contemporary times when we are making archives accessible to users, and we have the option now to go beyond visual and textual material of publications of other things, do you think that it will bring more dynamic and open-ended access to the archive from the researchers and people trying to access it if we include more technology, and if any technological development will help further criticality into these kind of readings.
So if we'll try and answer, if I cannot answer the full, then you take on or you take on, whichever. Yeah, so I just wanted to say that, I want to say that the crisis, we don't have an answer to crisis, but it's the main thing is to learn from what already exists. And one or two things we have been reading through again and again, and then we are finding that the answers to crisis have already been described, or the crisis have been discussed in the past by many people. Like Chandra in one, Chandralekha, the dancer, talks about while traditional thought conceptualizes the human body as a unique center, a center of the universe expanding outwards into the cosmos, the industrial society converts the human body into the prime target of attack, as citizen attacked by the political system, as consumer attacked by the economic system, as individual bombarded by the media, denied contact with the nature, incapable of self-renewal, suffocated by poisons in air and water, isolated and deprived of directions for change. Can our dance and art help to transcend that affiliation? That alienation. I'm so sorry. So the thing is that the answers have been sought in the past time and again. And I think our role as artists are to go on seeking these kinds of answers. And I think to just very shortly say to Soumya, archives in dance and music in terms of technicality have gone into artificial intelligence, and
I was going to say that
too. All the works, but still embodied knowledge, transmission of dance knowledge, these kinds of very, very basic embodied registers are really, can that be fully archived? I don't know.
There are always limits to the.
Yeah, so we always, it is an unfinished process of archiving that we leave as archive, and we imagine that is the finished archive.
I'll quickly answer, and then we can. So to answer your question about, first of all, you said, something like it has like a received crisis or inherited. The crisis is yours. You can't inherit a crisis, it's yours. And you have to define it. So you can't crisis is not a trend. Crisis is your crossroad. Until you don't burn with it, it is not yours. So if you think it is keeping you awake at night, then it's a crisis. And then, first of all, identify it, articulate it, and then it might take you a lifetime to find an answer to it. And to young people, like when I teach, I say that if you have a hunch today, hang on to it, because that's your way out. So don't dismiss, because when you were young, we are very dismissive of hunches and stuff because we think, oh, hame kya pata. If you have a hunch, stick to it. But you definitely have to define it. And it might take you a long time to even define it, because what you feel, you might not have words for. And that's why dance. Because dance is about what we can't put words to. That's why the body. But it's your crisis.
So we come to an end, regretfully, sadly. We will have to close the program here. We would love to continue the conversations, and so you can perhaps write to the Marg editorial team, or us. We are all three quite accessible, I think. So, and we can continue the conversation anytime, anywhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita, Urmi, Navtej. That was a really good session and inspiring also. I also want to, we're really glad that we could bring readings on dance to Delhi, and thank you all, everybody for showing up. I've got to thank a few people. We've got to thank the National Centre of Performing Arts, TVS, BNP Paribas, the Naurottam Seksarya Foundation, and the Harish and Beena Shah Foundation for supporting readings on dance and making it possible for the publication to reach readers like you. I'd like to thank IIC for yet another successful event together. And last but not least, you guys for making it out on this really rainy day and coming and supporting readings on dance. Also, the magazine is available for sale outside, and please do pick up a copy on your way out.
I want to thank the dancers and the photographers who have given us their bodies and their talent for this book, for our archive and for it to be there, and for Marg to be able to exist. I really want to be able to say that because we can write what we do, but there is so much that is communicated through the bodies of the dancers and through the imaginations of the photographers who have been able to allow us to bring that to you. And that is something that is extremely important, and that's actually more than 50%. That's what we are inspired by, and that's what we are writing about. So thank you very much.